Basically, I'm in violation of two basic principles. One, don't stand between a large Jewish crowd and dinner, and never try to speak after Amos Gilad has finished his performance. But I will try to see if I can weave together some of the strands of this extraordinary conference. But Gary, I cannot avoid making a personal comment. My first ever speaking engagement was also under B'nai B'rith auspices, so at Camp Starlight in '73. So it's a nice rounding off of a long circle. Look, what we've heard here since yesterday evening should leave us in no doubt about 3 points. One, that BESA and B'nai B'rith made a timely choice to convene this conference. Perhaps we didn't even fully realize just how timely it will turn out to be under the present circumstances. And I'm personally grateful to Ephraim Inbar, to Ellen Schneider, and to all who worked to make this possible, for the foresight and for this opportunity. The second point is that the Eastern Mediterranean matters. And indeed is now more important than ever, and perhaps one of the two most important flashpoints in international affairs, side by side with the South China Sea. And we've heard from Amos, from General Amidror, from Udi Eran, two of my former commanders and one of my former officers, just how important it is for Israel. We've heard from Bruno how important it is for France, not to mention that what we've heard right now from a Greek perspective, earlier from a Cypriot perspective, from an Italian perspective. The Eastern Mediterranean is by now one of the crucial arenas for international affairs, and we are very much at the cusp of major developments, as we have already heard, in this field. And the third point is that side by side with the good news and the miracles, and the celebration of Israeli, Greek, Cypriot, regional Mediterranean cooperation as we've seen it emerge in recent weeks and months, we also heard quite a good bit of worrying regional news, international news. This prospect of cooperation comes against the background of dark clouds. To go back to, Professor Abulafia, to your opening statement, you said very succinctly, very effectively, as a summary of all our issues here, the Mediterranean is broken and in need of repair. Can we put it together again? Or to use the conceptual framework of your book, can there be a sixth Mediterranean emerging out of the chaotic conditions we are now facing, in the same way that the second Mediterranean, the Phoenician, Greek, Roman Mediterranean, emerged from the mysterious chaos at the end of the second millennium BC, or as the fifth Mediterranean, the Anglo-French Mediterranean, emerged as the power of Spain and the Ottoman Empire receded in the early 19th century. I believe that the answer, the possible answer, is yes, if. If the like-minded countries, as we've heard here, and the like-minded forces in this region and beyond it are willing to stand together to create new realities. And I'm very grateful for what we've just heard from all of our three final speakers. Minister Kemenos had to leave, but I will say this in all three languages. Efcharisto parapoli, grazie mille. Toda raba to Amos as well, who also had to leave. We all know the press of business in this country. But the spirit of what we've heard is very significant. Maybe it's a bit early to talk about an alliance, but there's certainly what is emerging is an effective array of like-minded stakeholders in the Eastern Mediterranean able to make a difference. I'm talking still about states with state interests. And the universal empires of the past or the cosmopolitan city-states of the past are not relevant to our realities, but the cooperation between states remains crucial. And what we've heard here, at least in this respect, gives us some foundation to build on in terms of a future Mediterranean security architecture. And all the more important as we speak, as we debated here, the prospect of what could emerge as a long-term retreat of American commitment, which I hope will not happen. I share Amos's statement that at the end Israel has no viable alternative, but we do need to work this into our calculations. We have to be able to stand on our own feet in this region. But we do not have to stand alone. There are three reasons, I believe, that we've spoken about here again and again as to why we need to stand together. You know, it was Moshe Sharet who once said that the present state of the Jewish people was shaped by two miracles and a catastrophe. The miracle of Israel, the miracle of North American Jewry, and the catastrophe of the Holocaust in Europe. I would say that presently we are facing a region being shaped by two catastrophes and a miracle. The catastrophe of chaos and the horrors of state collapse in Libya, Syria, and beyond. The catastrophe of the rise of Islamist totalitarian in its three variants, the Iranian branch, the most dangerous and the most dominant, as Amos said, and I agree. The IS branch, or the so-called ISIS, or so-called caliphate of the man who calls himself Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and other variants on Salafi jihadism. And the third threat of the Muslim Brotherhood in its variants, including Hamas in Gaza, all of them branches of the same poisonous tree. And the miracle of the potential of energy cooperation and economic cooperation between like-minded countries, which has now come to the fore because of the discoveries of recent years. So put together, there's certainly a prospect here. And we can stand together. And let me say that if the Turkish leadership finds it in their interest finally to change course and rejoin this community of like-minded nations, it's clear that we need to leave the door open for that as well. Let me suggest that while thinking about the Eastern Mediterranean equation, we need to continue, and we've heard this again and again in our conversations here, to keep in mind two important aspects. One has to do with the institutional or structural elements. As we've heard from Avivid Bar-Ilan, the UFM is a remarkable demonstration that the future can be different, with its Moroccan Director General in 6 deputies, an Israeli and a Palestinian. If it didn't if this wasn't actually reality, you would say it's science fiction, but it does exist. However, it is still not sufficiently empowered, not sufficiently supported, not sufficiently budgeted to really make a difference. All this needs to change. But meanwhile, the smaller building blocks, such as the tripartite frameworks that we've just heard about, and maybe broader perspectives as suggested by Minister Terzi, could and should be the building blocks for an evolving architecture. And meanwhile, they can help the steep learning curve of the European Union as an institutional framework in terms of security and what it requires. We talk sometimes about the Middle East and its tribes. Policy in Brussels, in the member states, even in Washington, and even here, has its own tribes. There's the tribe of lawyers, which seems to be multiplying. There is the tribe of human rights activists. There's the tribe of the economists and the trade specialists. And there's the tribe of the soldiers and intelligence officers, which in Europe, I think, has been, let's say, relegated for much too long to an inferior position. I think there's a learning process right now at work, as Amos said, and others have said here, and as we heard from Minister Kamenos, Minister Terzi, this is no longer a viable position, given the challenges that we all face and face together. And in terms of culture, lifestyle, commonalities of daily life in the Mediterranean, and that's my second point, these intangible affinities can and should complement the strategic imperatives. When Tennyson wrote about Ulysses, Odysseus, in his late age in Ithaca, he said, though much is taken, much abides. Though much has been destroyed by fragmentation and by nationalist fragmentation and by the Islamist threat, there's still much that is in common, that strike anyone who's been to Tel Aviv, Athens, Marseille, Tunis. And just to bring some examples of how the grid of commonalities still works and should continue to work. What all of this adds up to, and this is my last point, is that we here in BESA and our partners in this effort, NABRIT and others, have a lot to continue to look at. And this, as you've just heard, and we are committed to that, and this will be the first of regular conferences and other research activities on the Mediterranean as a strategic environment. Since the Mediterranean matters, understanding it is important, and no less significant is the duty that we feel to bring these insights to ever-widening audiences. If we have made some steps in this direction here in these last 2 days, let this be the reward of our efforts. Thank you.